everyone, I'm Eileen here with Eileen Chevalier's Typewriter Alphabet Flashcards. Today we are going to take a look at pollinators. While some angiospermae, which is flowering plants, rely on wind or the anatomy of their flowers for pollination, many rely on help from the animal kingdom: bees, wasps, moths, butterflies, and more, including mammals. In this lesson, we'll discover the vast array of pollinators. We do have a couple books that we're going to look at. Of course, you're going to look at your Typewriter Alphabet Flashcards. The one that we're specifically going to look at today is the T card. And I'll just go ahead and read it to you. Most flowering plants need pollinators, like bees and butterflies. Pollinators move pollen from the anther of the stamen to the stigma of the pistil. This is how flowers make seeds. So pollinators are pretty important because without them, a lot of plants couldn't make seeds. So then we're going to look at this book, which is Flowers Are Calling. And so this is kind of talking about the pollinators. Yes, pollinators. But there are a lot more that aren't in this book. So this is just going to kind of introduce us to pollinators. And then we're going to look at, of course, the Flora book. Before we get into the books, we're going to do some definitions. We have 3 for today, so go ahead and get out your journal and I will read these for you. Pollen, tiny grains attached to the anther of a stamen, contain DNA that combine with the ovum's DNA to create new plants. Pollination is transferring pollen from the anther to the stigma of a pistil. Pollinator, an animal that aids in pollination. All right, so let's think a little more deeply about this subject. It takes a lot of work to attract a pollinator. How do plants keep them there? So once they've done all this work to get a pollinator to come and visit them, how do they keep them there? Flora gives some interesting examples. We're going to look at 2 different pages. One of them we've already looked at before, which is fascinating. Page 212 and 258. I'm not going to completely reread this one to you. You can go back and look at the lessons we did on that previously. So here's 212, which we read about. The beetles actually get trapped inside the flower. The flower closes over the beetles and doesn't let them go. That's one way of keeping them there. And then the other one is 258. So other ways, a little less. Now, not that the one that traps the beetles also has nectar, but a lot of plants don't actually, a lot of flowers don't close. Some of them do, orchids do it as well, on top of the pollinators. But they have something that the pollinators want, which is nectar. And we're going to talk about that more in future lessons, but that is definitely one of the ways that they keep them there. So some flowers have like lots of wonderful nectar, and then other flowers, they still have lots of wonderful nectar, but the way they dole it out is a little different. The S and E flashcards show examples of the capitulum inflorescence. You can see the S right behind me. So in the sunflower, if you remember, these long, tiny florets all around the outside are ray florets, and they attract pollinators in. So they have fused petals. It looks like each one is just one, but that's not really true. There are multiple petals, just like on regular flowers, and you can kind of see that usually when you look up close at the edges of them or the ridges down the length of the florets. So ray florets around the outside, and then in the capitulum, which means head, inflorescence. So this is like the head, the sunflower head. Each one of these tiny, tiny, tiny pieces is a floret and will have its own stamen and pistil and its own nectar. So what happens is that they start blooming from the outside, and then they'll keep blooming all the way in. And that gives the pollinators incentive to come back every day. So every day they can come back, and there are more flowers that are open. And there are lots of flowers that are open, right? So that's why on our sunflowers, we would always see tons of different pollinators. maybe at different times of the day. Certain ones would come in the morning and then other ones would come in the afternoon. But there were always a lot because there were always flowers opening. So that's one way that they're keeping them coming, because once they know where the flower is, they're like, oh, I can go back there again tomorrow. So in this type of arrangement, the florets bloom progressively, sometimes over the course of weeks. How does this help the plant attract and keep pollinators? And how does this prolonged blooming compare with other flower inflorescences? So if you have a plant that has one flower and it keeps blooming progressively, that could be similar to other plants that have single flowers, but the flowers themselves all over the plant are blooming at different times. And like a sunflower, it will bloom and it will make all of its seeds and then it will die. But there are other perennial plants, that's an annual. Other perennial plants, which means through the years, so they stay there and then they have, like in the spring, they'll have flowers. And then again, in the fall, they'll have like another set. So they're keeping their pollinators coming back at different times of the year. And not every single flower on the plant is blooming at one time. A lot of plants do that. Like the lily of the valley does it, where it blooms at the bottom first and then it progressively blooms up. Then read pages 234 through 5 of Flora to learn about buzz pollination, which is really cool. How is this different from the way most flowers are pollinated? How is it similar to wind pollination? Could other pollinators accomplish the same for this plant? So let's look at that page 234. Let's see if you recognize what this plant is. I don't know if you've seen that one before. It's called borage. And it doesn't look maybe super inviting. So we'll have a whole lesson about protection. But as you could see, and I might just show you one more time and point to it, especially if you look down here at the bottom and it's just showing you even on the stem, there are all of these little really uninviting bristly hairs all along the stem of that plant that just make it really unwelcoming for most pollinators. So perhaps it has a very specific kind of pollination that it wants to have happen. So I'm going to read you a couple things from the page. Pollination by design. Unlike other buzz-pollinated plants, borage, which is this one, flowers, store pollen within porocidal, and I might be mispronouncing that, anthers, tube-like structures where only a small amount of pollen is released at a time from the tip. Other adaptations, such as hair-like trichomes, danger, may help to deter unwanted visitors, allowing only desired pollinators clear access to the blossoms. So it has a specific way that it wants to be pollinated, and it's designed the plant so that there are only the right kind of pollinators are going to come and they're going to do the right kind of thing. So here they are. I'm going to give you a little up close of this picture right here. So there's a bee, buzz pollination in action. The bumblebees latch onto the anther with their jaws. They gather pollen into their, I might mispronounce this as well, the corbiculate. Basically, these are like where the bee stores the pollen on its legs. So it can fly with it. It's very sticky. It's really amazing. I have other links to that as well. So buzz pollination in action. As a bee vibrates its flight muscles, so it's not moving, but it's vibrating its flight muscles, the motion shakes the flower's anther, making it release a small cloud of pollen. The sonication exposes the bee to a force equivalent to 30 times that of gravity. So it is a very forceful vibration. It's like if you ever had an electric toothbrush and it's like vibrating in your mouth, compare that with just like normal brushing your teeth. So it's a vibration. So that's why it's called buzz, because when you buzz, it's like buzz, just like the toothbrush in your mouth, the electric toothbrush. So it's the shaking that's releasing the pollen, and the plant wants that, which is why it's not letting other insects come to it or other animals come to it. And then it wants that vibration, that specific type of pollination. So buzz pollination, if you've never heard of it, there you go. So a couple things for your journal. Create a journal entry with some of your favorite pollinators and the plants they love. And you could also create a more detailed entry that illustrates a specific relationship between certain plants and their pollinators. So read up on it and look at different examples. It's amazing and really, really cool. I actually have a link to an article about like really unusual kind of pollinators. And it includes like a bunch of mammals, which is weird. We don't normally think of mammals as pollinators. So there are a lot of animals that are like bigger that you just think they wouldn't really pollinate those things, but they do. Many examples can be found in Flora. So if we look at pages 227 through 267, there are some great examples. But obviously it's not complete. There's so many, and the scientists are still discovering these relationships that animals have. So here, this one's really cool. I don't know if you noticed that one before. There's a gecko. So there are a lot of lizards that are pollinators, which is really cool. Ooh, here are some pygmy possums. Right here. Those are pretty cool. And lemurs on the other page. And of course, moths. So this one's really cool. That moth comes in the winter. So this is a witch hazel, and it's a lot like, if you look at the F card, the Forsythia, that one's blooming in the winter. So there aren't as many active pollinators in the winter, but this moth is a winter, what is it called? The satellite moth. Shivers to raise its body temperature so that it can fly in sub-zero conditions. So it's like specially adapted to pollinate the plants that are blooming when it's cold. So anyway, there's a bunch in there. It's really cool. Find some that you like. Let's look at this book really quickly. Flowers Are Calling. So it's really cool. There are lots of flowers, and they don't include all the pollinators in here, but it has lots of other really great information that I'll just introduce you to. Flowers are calling Little Black Bear. No, not a bear. He doesn't care. They're calling a butterfly to dip from the air. Flowers are calling a wet green frog. No, not a frog. She likes her soggy bog. They're calling a bumblebee to look near their log. So frogs are kind of like, we think of them as like small creatures that like slink around, kind of like the gecko that we just saw. So geckos do pollinate, even if this frog isn't. Flowers are calling a porcupine. No, not a porcupine. She wouldn't take the time. They're calling a hummingbird to sip at her vine. Their vine. All right, so then after they do this, it's really cool because they go into the specific ways that the plants are made and their relationship with their pollinators. So if you don't have the Flora book or you want a different look at it, then go ahead and look at this book and you can see those relationships as well. And to keep doing this, here's one. The pictures in here are so cool. So there's one at night with the raccoons and the moths. And then they have more information in the back. So this is a really great book because it has, you know, those shorter pages and then it has more in-depth information as well. So it's a good one for a range of ages. All right, that's it. So put those in your journal and we will see you guys next time and learn more about nectaries and how those relationships look a little more closely. All right, see you soon.